Welcome to Clued in Mystery. I'm Sarah.
And I'm Brooke, and we both love mystery.
Hi, Brooke.
Hi, Sarah. I am so ready to talk about another subgenre in the mystery space with you today.
We're going to be talking about white collar crime today. And when I say that, Brooke, are you thinking of accountants and lawyers and expecting the stories to be pretty boring?
Yeah, possibly that is a thing, right? All the guys in suits and, yeah, numbers could get boring.
It could, but often the stories involve international travel, almost always involve large sums of money and intrigue. We typically see fewer situations where the main character stumbles onto a body and must piece together what happened. Instead, the sleuth is often following a paper trail that leads to corruption, conspiracy, or fraud. Financially motivated crimes are not new. Many of the stories that we read from the golden age of mystery involve an inheritance, for example. But the crimes themselves usually involve death and take place in dining rooms, libraries, or outdoors, rather than in boardrooms. The term white collar crime appeared in a 1949 book by the same name by sociologist Edwin H. Sutherland. In it, Sutherland presented his theory that crimes like fraud and embezzlement that are committed in the workplace by wealthier people were overlooked by police who focused investigations on poorer criminals. Modern day mysteries with financial elements tend to involve money laundering, insider trading, and pyramid schemes. And although the stories are frequently free from death, the crimes themselves can be just as impactful for the victims. Technology, especially in stories that are set in present day, plays a significant role. Think of cybercrime or email phishing schemes. And sometimes we end up cheering for the crook. Think of the story of Frank Abagnale and the film Catch Me If You Can. So today, Brooke, we're going to be talking about white collar crime and how we see it in mysteries.
Thank you, Sarah. That was great. And this is going to be a really fun discussion. I especially loved learning where this term came from. That wasn't something that I thought of researching, but that there's actually clear back in 1949 a book with that title. And I thought that that was a great point that sometimes police officers, law enforcement overlook these crimes. And I think some of that actually has to do with the fact that these criminals kind of hide behind this veneer of professionalism and respectability.
I think the perception for Sutherland at the time, when he was doing his research, was that um, police hold people who are wealthier in a higher regard, and don't want to step on their toes. And I think there was also some police corruption as well.
We're led to believe, even though this is completely false, that we should trust or we could trust successful people. And so it creates this kind of shield for them. And as you say, in some of those instances the police are involved. And we've read stories that have that component in them.
Absolutely. When thinking about this episode and the different ways we see white collar crime in mysteries, um, I thought about it's a film from the early 2000s, from 2003, and it's called Owning Mahowney. And it's about bank fraud. And it stars Philip Seymour Hoffman. And it's a Canadian story, actually. He was, I think, with CIBC, which is one of our major banks here in Canada. And he had a gambling addiction and was creating loans and falsifying paperwork to fuel his gambling addiction. And it's quite a sad film because you just see this descent that the main character Mahowney spirals as his addiction takes over more of his life, and he makes worse and worse decisions at work. But the film is about the investigation to uncover all of this fraud that's been going on.
Right. Yeah, I think that that is another component of these stories is many times the white collar criminal is, I mean, they're definitely doing something shady. They're earning money fraudulently, or they're working the system somehow. I mean, you mentioned the Frank Abagnale Jr. story, which is one of my favorite movies. It was working really well for a while, and then things just kind of spiral out of control. And that's sometimes when we see this turn from strictly white collar crime to perhaps there's like a murder that has to happen in order to try to keep them safe.
Yeah, and unfortunately, that's true in real life. So, one of the things that I looked into a little bit to prepare for today's episode was the Panama Papers, which was, if you'll remember, I think it was in 2016 when all of this data was released, and it detailed large sums of money moving around to avoid tax, facilitate political corruption, and launder money. And it was all kind of centered with a law firm that was based in Panama, and that's where the name Panama Papers came from. And there were real world implications for this. And actually, I didn't know this. Two journalists were murdered because of their reporting related to information in the Panama Papers.
Wow, that is so interesting, Sarah. And it reminds me of the fact that much of the true crime that people listen to on maybe podcasts or read in books, uh, a lot of them start out in the white collar world, like online scams, or
Hmm.
somebody committing somewhat minor frauds in their community, but then things spiral out of control. And I've heard it said that when white collar crime escalates into somebody dying, then it's red collar crime.
Well, Brooke, as I was thinking about this episode, I realized, because I know I've said before, oh, I'm not really into true crime. I'm actually into true white collar crime because I've
Hmm.
I've listened to more white collar crime podcasts than I have the serial killer or missing people or the other type of true crime podcasts. There was one that was done a little while ago about Gerald Cotton, who was a single-handedly he was running a Bitcoin exchange that turned out to be a Ponzi scheme, which was only realized to be the case when he died suddenly and nobody could access their money. And there was this huge investigation, some suspicion that perhaps he hadn't uh, died of an illness, which was the original reporting, and this was an exit scam for him. But that was a fascinating story, I think in around 2019. Unfortunately, I think there's a lot more white collar crime that happens that we see in the real world than murder.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I've mentioned before, I think on the show, that one of my favorite true crime television shows is American Greed. And there again, we're talking white collar crime. Um, so I would agree. I think that that's a bigger draw for me for true crime, and it might possibly be because of that point that you just made about there's these real world fears that are tied up in it. Like, what if I lose all my savings? What if I, invest in some scam and get taken and my retirement is gone? What if I am trusting someone that I shouldn't just because they seem, slick and put together? I mean, those are things that we really worry about, especially when we're dealing with our life savings, for instance.
Very true. We are far more unlikely to stumble across a body than we are to experience a scam. I mean, we get, phishing emails daily, right? People offering
Hmm.
us millions of dollars if they can just funnel it through our bank accounts, and then you get to keep some of that money. The offers from foreign princes or foreign dignitaries that we all know not to click on those links.
Right. Or something even far more boring. I mean, I think that was what, 2 weeks ago, Sarah. And when we got on to talk, I was actually excited because, this topic was on our minds. And I said, I was just the victim of a phishing scam because I had a very legitimate looking email that said that one of my accounts had been hacked. And I just needed to click on this link and solve the day. And it was completely false. And so I definitely could have fallen into one of these traps where it wasn't going to ruin my whole life, but it was probably going to be a tremendous hassle. And I probably would have lost a few $100s.
No, exactly. So let's turn, Brooke, to some of the fictional white collar crime that we may have read or watched. I recently finished a book by Cory Doctorow and actually finished a couple of his books. He has a main character. He's a forensic accountant in his 60s. His name is Martin Hench, and the books are about him investigating high value white collar crime. And his thing, I think, is that he keeps 25% of what he recovers. And if he's recovering a couple $1 million, that's not a bad payday for him.
Oh, that sounds like a great series, Sarah. I just like you said that you enjoy probably out of any true crime, white collar, stories. I find that this premise is one of my favorites for mysteries too, because it's so, like we said, relatable. And I just recently read The Antique Hunter's Guide to Murder. And this is a 2024 release by C.L. Miller. And so, the premise of this is that there are actually these antique hunters who go out in the world and try to locate these antiques that have been stolen, antiquities and antiques. And that used to be the main character's job. And a new crime draws her back into the world of antique hunting. And it was just a really great, kind of different setup. And although you get that murder mystery, the reason why the crime is happening is all based in, a financial gameplay.
Oh, that sounds so good. And I think I'm going to have to add that to my reading list, Brooke.
Yeah, you won't be disappointed. It's really good.
Another series featuring a forensic accountant is by Ian Hamilton, and his main character is Ava Lee, and she is a Canadian accountant. Um, she travels around the world following the money trail. Um, Again, like the other one I mentioned, Martin Hench, is dealing with large sums of money, but she's trained in martial arts and sometimes gets a little bit physical, which is a bit different than the other series, but equally good. I really enjoy that series as well.
Yeah, that sounds great. Well, speaking of more physical, the next one that I had to mention is the same. So I was thinking of the movie The Accountant. It's a 2016 movie starring Ben Affleck as this mathematic savant, and he is an accountant, and he tracks down this big scam that's going on in this corporation. And one thing that I think that this movie really highlights is a trend in these stories where the sleuth character, because we don't really have a detective, but we have some character who stumbles upon what is really going on. And they're often put in this terrible dilemma about what to do next, because if they turn the bad guys in, people get hurt. If they don't turn the bad guys in, people get hurt. And so they usually are in a no win situation. It's just a really satisfying predicament to see characters in.
Oh, I haven't seen that, Brooke. I think there's a sequel coming out maybe this year.
Oh, that's great. I hadn't heard. I will definitely check that out.
Um, Another I thought of was The Firm, which is the 1991 book by John Grisham, and then it was a film with Tom Cruise later in the 90s. I think we talked about that one when we talked about legal thrillers, um, but it involves a lot of money laundering and criminal activity uh, that we cheer for the main character because he comes up with a really clever way of saving the day and saving himself.
Right. When he's put in that dilemma, he comes up with this really clever solution. Yeah, The Firm is a great representation of this subgenre. Another one of my, favorite movies in this category, was Margin Call. It was a 2011 film, and it was a fictionalized take on the 2008 financial crash, and it's like the 24 hours that led up to the stock market crash, and these sort of like intern or lower level stock guys are all they're working late and they're watching what's happening and they're seeing what's about to take place. And so they have these decisions to make, like, do they notify people because there was potential money to be made that day? So do they kind of work the system? Do they tip off their friends and family about removing stocks? It's just a really fascinating predicament that they're in. And this has Kevin Spacey and Demi Moore, and it's a star-studded cast and really great movie.
Well, and I think we mentioned earlier that because there are lots of real life examples of white collar crime, I think Hollywood often draws inspiration from it. And I don't remember if Boiler Room, that film, was based on a true story or just inspired by various examples. But I think that's another example of, I think they were pumping stocks for companies that didn't exist, or I can't remember. It's been a long time since I've seen it, but just when you were talking about Margin Call, it reminded me of that film. Um,
Mhm.
I also thought about the film Erin Brockovich. I mean, it's corporate negligence, really, that she's combating, but I think you could make a pretty strong argument that that was white collar crime.
I agree. I think that's a great example, and it's a little bit of a twist on the situation, but was definitely criminal negligence in not informing their customers, and a huge loss of life and financial resources. So yeah, I think that's a great example.
Last year, I think it was, I read a book by Quartey, and it's titled The Missing American. And so it's set in Ghana, and we get the other side of that relationship scam. So we see the um, people who are perpetrating the scam, who are, just young men who are pretending to be um, beautiful women preying on widowers in the US, pretending that they've um, fallen in love with them, and getting these older men to send them money. Um, and it's actually a PI, the sleuth. She starts out working for the police and ends up being part of a detective agency. And so that was an interesting take on the genre.
Oh, that's really fascinating to look at that from the other side. I don't think that is anything that I've ever seen before, so that would be worth looking into. But that idea of kind of this relationship scam, like this was much earlier than what we see these days. But I was also reminded of The Talented Mr. Ripley by Patricia Highsmith. I mean, just a classic white collar crime. He's, charming. He's doing forgery and these financial crimes in order to make his way in the world.
Oh, that's such a good example, Brooke. So one thing that I learned recently is that the IRS, and this is true of Canada's Revenue Agency, has a criminal investigation unit, and they have officers who have badges, and they make the arrests uh, of people who are involved in financial crimes. And it was actually the IRS criminal investigation team that arrested Al Capone. So I think most people know that he ended up in prison for tax fraud, but it was IRS investigators, not police investigators.
Exactly. So I think sometimes we don't imagine that there is that branch of the IRS that are, as a SWAT team going in to maybe like nail the accountant firm or something. It's pretty unique to think about.
I read a book not too long ago about cryptocurrency and kind of the crimes associated with that. And that's where I learned about the IRS CI. So that book was Tracers in the Dark by Andy Greenberg, and he's a journalist with Wired magazine. And he did a really great job of explaining kind of a very technical thing, cryptocurrency, in a way that was really accessible. So, if someone is interested in learning a little bit more about that, then I would recommend that. And it was just fascinating the way that the investigators tackled these crimes.
Oh, that sounds great, Sarah. And, just as you were speaking, it dawned on me how hands off most of these criminals can be. I mean, especially in this day and age, they're completely communicating with their victims via the internet. Typically, they don't have to see the faces or really know the people that they're harming. And so I think it makes it like, to them, it feels like a very victimless crime when in fact they're really doing a lot of harm and causing a lot of fear as well. I know, like, the older generation of people in my family are really scared of these scams, even though I don't. Thankfully, no one has been a victim of any. I think that fear that will happen is really tangible in this day and age when we're doing so much of our interacting online.
Oh, that's such a good point, Brooke. That distance that the criminal has from their victim, I'm sure it makes it easier to justify. Well, Brooke, thank you for this conversation. It's been really interesting to discuss white collar crime, both in real life and in fiction.
Absolutely. It's been great. And we're not quite done with the topic. We have an interview with author Jacob Kerr coming up, and he has a new book out that includes some white collar crime. So we're looking forward to speaking with him soon. But for today, thank you for joining us on Clued in Mystery. I'm Brooke.
And I'm Sarah, and we both love mystery.
Clued in Mystery is written and produced by Brooke Peterson and Sarah M. Stephen. Music is by Shane Ivers. If you liked what you heard, please consider telling a friend, leaving a review, or subscribing with your favorite podcast listening app. Visit our website at cluedinmystery.com to sign up for our newsletter, The Clued In Chronicle, or to join our paid membership, The Clued In Cartel. We're on social media at Clued In Mystery.